Hi everyone, Miss Lerner here. I want to take a time to go over the Unit 3 review activities. This unit is especially broad and comprehensive with lots of parts. So I'm going to ask you to really kind of go back and take a look back at your mnemonics. I'll be providing you with a list of the mnemonics for this unit as well. Okay, so let's start out with neurotransmitters, the important neurotransmitters to know. Okay, acetylcholine. I always think of acetylcholine as a guy named Ace. Okay. Not only is he smart, right, in school and he aces all his tests, but he also is like, a sports ace, a sports wizard. So he's really good at moving his muscles. Okay. So it says that it's responsible for learning and memory and critical to blankety blank, deliver messages from the neurons to the muscles. Okay, so when we're going from the CNS, right, to the muscles, okay, so that's away from the CNS, that's going to be motor, um, motor function, okay, or efferent pathways. I'll just put critical to motor movement. Okay, you could write efferent pathways, whatever you think fits best for you. Um, Deficits in acetylcholine production are going to result in a disease that robs people of their memory, known as Alzheimer's disease. Okay. Moving on to dopamine. Yo, man, that's dope. Okay. If something's dope, it's pleasurable. Okay. I had said Madonna dopamine. She is going to vogue and kind of dance around because dopamine's involved with motor movement as well. We know that when we have too much dopamine, we have the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Okay, so I'm just going to write schizophrenia here for excess. What hallucinogens do is they act like dopamine. Okay, so essentially a hallucinogen is going to be an agonist for dopamine, or cocaine is an agonist for dopamine. It prevents it from being going through the process of reuptake in the presynaptic neuron. And in that way, with enough cocaine abuse, you will hallucinate. It does the same thing as if it's excess dopamine with schizophrenia. On the other side of things, a deficit of dopamine is going to result in Parkinson's disease. I mean, think about the tics and the other problematic movement patterns that are indicative of that disorder. All right, there is another blank here. Schizophrenia is often treated with blank drugs that block the dopamine receptors, limiting the amount of dopamine being transmitted across the synapse. Yeah. Drugs that we use for schizophrenia are known as antipsychotics. We didn't really get to treatment in the class, or neuroleptics. Okay, and that they're just acting as antagonists for dopamine, preventing dopamine from being absorbed in the postsynaptic neuron. Endorphins. I can be your hero, baby. I could take away your pain. Okay. When you have endorphins that are released, it's like a natural runner's high, feelings of pleasure, pain control, stress reduction. Endogenous morphine. That is what endorphin stands for. Okay. If we have too little, if there's deficits probably involved with addiction. If you get so used to opiates, you stop producing your own natural opiates. And then when you take those opiates away, it's a very, very unpleasant experience. So you're going to go seek out the opiates again. The G's. One is your most inhibitory neurotransmitter, and the other is the most excitatory. GABA is the brain's major inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it slows things down. Okay, people who do not have enough GABA may feel always on edge or very anxious. Things like Xanax and Librium, benzodiazepines as a drug class from Unit 5, we're going to be agonists for GABA to slow your brain down. Okay. That being said, if you don't have enough GABA, your brain's going to be overactive. You might have insomnia or seizures. Okay. Now, the other G is glutamate, okay? It is the glue for your neurons, for knowledge. It creates the links between neurons that form the basis of learning and long-term memory. It's your major excitatory neurotransmitter. If you have too much glutamate and your neurons are constantly saying fire, 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 this is why you get headaches or seizures. Okay. Sometimes people avoid food with what we call monosodium glutamate, um, because it's just glutamate in a food form and people will get headaches. Okay, it's acting like glutamate. Norepinephrine is also sometimes called noradrenaline. Norepinephrine in the brain is equivalent to adrenaline in the endocrine system, or epinephrine in the endocrine system. It therefore is responsible for things like arousal, alertness, fight or flight, heart rate, your mood. With a deficit of norepinephrine, we find that people exhibit depression. Okay. And the last serotonin, which is the one that is primarily associated with mood, is serotonin. Okay. Sarah Jessica Parker Tonin, from Sex and the City, responsible for mood, food, sleep, your sex drive. So that's why, when you become depressed, there's going to be a constellation of symptoms associated with depression, not just the lowered mood, but the decreased interest in sex, the inability to sleep or sleeping too much, not being able to eat, eating too much, and so forth. Okay, deficit, depression, and sometimes anxiety as well, anxiety disorders. Depression is often treated with what we call SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Those are going to prevent serotonin from being sucked back up through the process of reuptake in the presynaptic neuron, making the serotonin more available across the synapse so that you have more that the postsynaptic neuron may receive. Okay, so it essentially just makes it more plentiful. So things like Prozac and Lexapro and Effexor and Prestique and Paxil, these are all examples, brand names of SSRIs. Okay. So some important methods for studying the brain. Of course, there's just natural kinds of things that might happen, like accidents, and we look at like Phineas Gage, and we see that when the rod went through his prefrontal cortex, he was no longer Gage. His mood changed, his whole personality changed, and we knew about that area of the brain because of the result of that accident. Same thing with lesioning the brain, taking a part of the brain out. We see that when we can find results and we figure out the functionality of certain parts of the brain because of brain surgery. Obviously, lesioning the brain is a last resort. Less intrusive, right, are going to be these brain scans. Okay. And in class, I had said it was really important to know which ones are responsible for identifying the structure of the brain and which ones are responsible for the function. And there is one that straddles both. Okay. So let's start with an EEG. Okay. An EEG is just going to be where you place electrodes on the brain and you're going to monitor the brain's electrical activity. Because remember, the brain is an electrochemical enterprise. So we can see the brain waves. I mean, when you look at a sleep cycle from Unit 5 and you can see things like alpha and beta and theta waves and sleep spindles, those are all going to be the results of an EEG. You can get good resolution from this in terms of right away that something is happening. The first thing people usually do with brain injury is let's strap them onto EEG and make sure that the brain activity is normal. It's not invasive, it's painless. But one of the major disadvantages of it is, while it shows function, it shows nothing about what if it says in the readout that something is wrong, it doesn't show what is wrong. So it doesn't show the structure. It doesn't show anything about the structure of the brain. So there's something wrong. You hit your head. There's something going on. Your EEG says so. Now what? Okay. For that reason, we frequently use CAT scans. Okay, CAT scans are sometimes abbreviated as computerized axial tomography scans. Actually, are sometimes abbreviated as CAT scans or CT scans, and we do them not only of the brain but of other parts of the body as well. And we're using X-rays passed through different angles to get a really good kind of structural image of the brain. So advantage-wise, it has a high resolution of brain structure. Okay. Um, and it's a very good way because it is, highly high resolution. You're going to see a good depiction of those structures. Okay. Disadvantage wise, there's going to be potential damage due to exposure to x-rays, or you can say radiation. Same difference. You don't want to have a CAT scan every day. It's not good for you. And it doesn't give you any information about the activity in the brain. I can do a CAT scan and see the structures, but I don't know what is problematic necessarily in that functionality of that structure. Okay, so the next type of brain scan, it's a positron emission tomography scan, which is going to deal with function as well. Okay. What is happening here is there's an injection of radioactive glucose. Okay. And based upon how quickly that glucose is metabolized, if it's metabolized very quickly and it's very active, it's going to show up red. Okay. And the less metabolic regions will show up darker, like a darker blue. Okay, so it tracks the brain's consumption of a radioactive dye injection, providing images of brain function. It allows researchers to examine which brain areas consume most energy in a given test, thus providing info about brain function. Okay. As far as disadvantages go, yeah, I don't want to be exposed to radioactive dye every day. Like, it's not a good idea. Okay. It's lengthy, it's expensive, and it doesn't show anything about your brain structure. Okay. MRIs are very common as well. What MRIs are going to do is they're going to use magnetic fields that pulse through the brain in order to show the physicality of the brain structure. Okay, so it says strong magnetic fields. So when you're in an MRI machine, you're going to hear all these. Okay, it's going to sound like that because those are the magnetic fields that are being passed through so that you can get a good picture. It allows researchers to examine the structure. It's non-invasive, it's painless, but it can be, especially if you're not in an open MRI machine, which they do have now, it can be uncomfortable and claustrophobic because you're in a very small kind of tube. It doesn't give you any information about your brain function. Okay. Kind of the love child between a PET scan and an MRI scan is an fMRI scan. There's no radioactive glucose involved. However, there is an ability in an fMRI scan to detect the amount of blood flow in different brain regions. Okay, so it's not just about the structure then in a regular MRI. There's the functionality part, the fMRI. Okay, so underneath advantages, you're going to write shows both structure and function. And I mean, it's ultimately the best in terms of a comprehensive scan, but it can be uncomfortable and claustrophobic, just like a CT scan. I mean, an MRI scan can be. Okay, so best answer to each of the questions about biopsychology. Okay, paralysis of the left arm might be explained by a problem in the. Okay, so first of all, if I can't move something, is that going to be in my somatosensory cortex or with sensory motor cortex? Is that even a thing? Oh, it's going to have to be motor cortex, okay? Your left side of your body is controlled by the opposite hemisphere in the brain. Okay, so let's see here. Motor cortex in the frontal lobe in the right hemisphere, motor cortex in the frontal lobe in the left hemisphere, motor cortex in the parietal lobe in the left hemisphere, motor cortex in the occipital lobe. So where is the motor cortex? It's in the frontal lobes. Okay. Where would left arm paralysis be explained? In the motor cortex in the right hemisphere. Good. Which chemicals pass across the synapse and increase the possibility that the next neuron in the chain will fire? Synaptic peptides, inhibitory neurotransmitters, adrenaline-type exciters. Excitatory neurotransmitters, potassium and sodium. Okay, potassium and sodium are going to be ions that are vital for neurotransmission in terms of generating an action potential. Remember being assaulted by bananas. But the chemicals that pass across the synapse, not into the axon, and increase the possibility that the next neuron will fire, are known as excitatory neurotransmitters. Not good at this. Here we go. Okay. You eat some bad sushi and feel that you are slowly losing control over your muscles. The bacteria you ingested from the bad sushi most likely interferes with the use of serotonin, insulin, acetylcholine, thorazine, or adrenaline. Insulin is going to be responsible for regulating your blood sugar secreted by the pancreas. It's not going to be a neurotransmitter. Thorazine is actually the name for the most popular antipsychotic that they initially found that started the deinstitutionalization movement. Serotonin is responsible for food, mood, sleep. We're going with acetylcholine here. Okay, learning, memory, muscular control. Antidepressant drugs like Prozac are often used to treat mood disorders. According to what you know about their function, which neurotransmitter do these drugs try to affect? Right off the bat, serotonin. Serotonin, the major mood neurotransmitter. Okay. Which sentence most closely describes neural transmission? An electric charge is created in the neuron. The charge travels down the cell in the axon, and chemicals are released that cross the synapse to the next cell. Ooh, that sounds good. Okay, we'll leave that. The chemical change occurs within the cell. The change causes electric charge to be produced, and the charge jumps the gap between the nerve cells. No, we have the synapse, right? Because we know that's where the chemistry happens. It's not like the electricity just jumps the synapse. Why would we even have a synapse then? Remember that neurons don't touch each other. They have this gap. The electric charge produced chemically inside of a group of neurons causes chemical changes in surrounding cells. And neurotransmitters produced in the hindbrain are transmitted to the forebrain, causing electric changes in the cerebral cortex. That's not really one neuron. That's just describing brain activity. And neural transmission is an electrical process both inside and outside the cell. No, not both inside and outside the cell. I mean, it's chemical outside the cell, electrical inside the cell. So the answer here is going to be A. Nice work. All right. So, in most people, which of the following is a specific function of the left hemisphere that is typically not controlled by the right hemisphere? Producing speech, left hand, spatial reasoning, hypothesis, testing, abstract reasoning. Okay. Control of the left hand will be right hemisphere. Spatial reasoning, right hemisphere. Hypothesis testing, right hemisphere. Abstract reasoning, right hemisphere. Producing speech, left hemisphere. Left, language, logic. Split brain patients, remember we do a split brain procedure in very severe cases of epilepsy where all the other types of treatments have been exhausted. Split brain patients are unable to coordinate movements between their major and minor muscle groups. No. Speak about information received exclusively in the right hemisphere. Ooh, that sounds pretty good, because if it's in my right hemisphere, if it was projected to my left visual field, then it's in my right hemisphere, it's stuck there. I can't talk about it. I'm going to leave that there. C is incorrect, because if it was received exclusively in my left hemisphere, left logic language, I'd be able to say it. Solve abstract problems involving integrating logical and spatial information. No, that's not it. Or speak about information received exclusively through their left ear, left eye, or left side of their bodies. Now, be careful. E sounds like it's right, but you don't ever receive information just from one ear, okay? Things are localized, so you're always going to get ear waves in the other ear. So the answer here, okay, is going to be speak about information received exclusively in the right hemisphere, because it's stuck, right? You can't go to the left hemisphere. When researchers refer to brain plasticity, they are talking about the brain's ability to quickly regrow damaged neurons. No, that's neurogenesis, not plasticity. The surface texture and appearance caused by the layer known as the cerebral cortex. That's gyri and sulci, not plasticity. The brain's versatility caused by millions of different neural connections. That's pretty good. I'll leave that around. Our adaptability to different problems ranging from survival needs to abstract reasoning, that's just evolution, really. Or new connections forming in the brain to take over for damaged sections. Okay. C and E are both pretty good. E is the better answer here. Okay. Because usually when we talk about brain plasticity, we're talking about our brain rerouting itself in response to some sort of damage. Okay. It's not going to be just the way that neurons are connected to one another. It has to have some sort of damage involved. Which part of the brain is responsible for combining sounds into words and arranging words into meaningful sentences? Broca's area, Wernicke's area, hypothalamus, hippocampus, or medulla. Hypothalamus has all the F's: food, food, fluid, fight, flight, Fahrenheit, and the other F, fornication. Hippocampus is memory and spatial awareness. Medulla, like metal over your heart, which is going to be respiration and heart rate. The two areas where you can have brain damage that are going to impact your speech or understanding of speech are Broca's area and Wernicke's area, both on the left side of the brain. Broca's area, think Boca, producing words. Okay. Wernicke's area, think what? Understanding words. So combining sounds into words, Broca's area. Broca's area. Okay, so damage to the cerebellum would most likely result in, so cerebella, the ballerina, is going to be responsible for implicit memory, so things you don't have to effortfully encode or rehearse, like, the color of your neighbor's house, or, you know, how many times you've seen someone on a daily, on a day. And it's also going to be cerebella, the ballerina, which is balance and coordination. So respiratory failure, heart failure, muscular coordination, hearing, memory, got coordination right there. An EEG records direct electrical stimulation of the brain, the number of neurons in the brain, electrical impulses in the brain, chemical activity in specific areas of the brain, or stimulation of the frontal lobe. Electrical impulses in the brain. You're not stimulating the brain. You're detecting the electrical activity. The limbic system is responsible for, remember, the limbic system is the mammalian layer of the brain, that middle layer. Ha! I'm so emotional. I'm flailing my limbs. Okay, so the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus. So let's see here. Breathing regulations know that weak brainstem, specifically the medulla. Speech and language, that's going to be left hemisphere. Balance and coordination, no. The limbic system is going to be responsible for the control of hunger, thirst, and sex. It's the motivational and emotional center. The process by which a tiny electrical current is generated when the positive sodium ions rush inside the axon, causing the inside of the axon to reverse its charge, is called, okay, so it's saying the positive ions are rushing into the membrane of the axon. So initially, I rest on my pony, positive outside, negative inside. And then they go in and they switch that charge to be slightly positive, right? Okay, and through that depolarization, we call that an action potential. Okay, if an action potential starts at the very beginning of an axon, the action potential will continue at the same speed to the very end of the axon. This concept is known as nerve impulse, synapse, resting state, all or none law, or sodium pump. All or none law. Axons away! Okay, yes, it goes down the axon toward the terminal buttons. All or nothing. A neuron doesn't just little bit fire. Which of the following best explains the role of the sympathetic nervous system? Preparing the body for a traumatic event, returning the body for equilibrium, preparing the body for fight or flight, maintaining the body's vital function, or maintaining homeostasis. Preparing the body for fight or flight, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a traumatic event. It could just be, taking a test, taking an FRQ. That's not a trauma. That's just an anxiety-provoking episode. So fight or flight. Maintaining homeostasis or equilibrium would be the parasympathetic nervous system. Think parachute. And Which of the following neurotransmitter most closely resembles the effects that alcohol has on the nervous system? Let's see, anandamide, which is actually an agonist for, it's your body's natural cannabinoids. GABA, dopamine, acetylcholine, or serotonin. Well, there's only one that slows things down, and alcohol is a depressant, so we're going to go with GABA here. Okay. Thanks so much. I hope that this helped. I will see you all soon.